So I think without taking much time, I would like to get back to you and ask about your journey. From a bureaucrat to an author. So how did it happen? What had been the push factors that actually compelled you to leave the lucrative civil services and take back switch careers, take back to an entirely different field, I mean, of writing, research and writing, your days in Delhi University and your days in LSR. So how did it leave an impact on you, and what made you decide to switch careers and finally settle down as a full-fledged writer? So we would like to hear more on these aspects from you. So
Ankita, what a comprehensive question. You want my life history in a nutshell.
But because I think it's a very interesting history actually, because I have known you since quite some time now. So I think the audience must also know about it. So what made you decide to write about Onagi, and how it got expanded into a series, your journey from a civil servant to being an author. So it's over to you now, Sumedha.
Okay. So thank you for calling me here, first of all, Ankita and CIS. And I'm very happy to be a part of this series of Indic talks and the stories from Itihas, from history. First, of course, I will give you my story, the story of my Itihas, and then we'll go on to the Itihas of, so many of the wonderful past events and histories that have happened in India. So I have always, ever since I was a child, I have always loved reading. I have always loved writing. I joined the civil services, and then I worked in the civil services for a few years, after which my husband decided to move to Geneva and work with the United Nations. So I had always wanted to write a book. So I thought I would take 2 years off and finally get down to writing that book. So I took 2 years off. And I started researching. And in the end, of course, my husband had to push me and say, stop researching and start writing. You can't spend all your life researching. That's my first love. So left to myself, perhaps I would only go on researching. But I wrote that book. Now, again, you will understand that for an outsider, it's very difficult to get a book published. How on earth do you get a book published? So I didn't have the first idea. That's also a very, very serendipitous and very, very funny story. I used to write on various forums on Facebook. There was one forum called the Rare Book Society of India, run by a gentleman, now a good friend, called Mr. Subbiah Yadalam. He got in touch with me. We became very good friends to that forum, and he asked me, why don't you write a book? I like what you write about history. I said, I've already written a book, but how about getting it published? So he said, all right, just wait. He knew the editor, the owner of Roli Books, the Kapoor family, and especially Priya Kapoor. So he sent a little excerpt from my book to Priya. Priya liked that excerpt and she got in touch with me, and she sent me a contract to Geneva, and I signed that contract. And actually, I published the book without ever meeting Subbiah, without ever meeting Priya. I met her for the first time when we were launching the book. And Subbiah, I still have not met. So I'm waiting to meet Subbiah. I still have not met him. So this was the very funny kind of story of how the book got published. The other question, of course, is my own interest in history, my own interest in the past, and my own interest in writing. But why the Mauryans? Why did I start writing about the Mauryans? I was born in Patna, ancient Patliputra. So it's very obvious that I would have a very special interest in that empire which emerged from Patliputra, which emerged from Magad. However, as I started researching a little bit more, I found that it was deeper than that. It was deeper than that first impetus which pushed me towards Patliputra. Because you can very well say that the Mauryans are the precursors to the modern Indian state. Now, Bharat is a very old civilizational concept, very, very old. Perhaps we do not even know the beginnings of this concept. But the Indian state, as it stands today, the political and geographical, as well as many other basic underpinnings of the modern Indian state, are all Mauryan. For example, have our national symbol, the lion seal that belongs to the Mauryans. Then you have the peacock, that was also a Mauryan symbol. Then you have this word called the rupiah. The rupiah also comes from the Arthashastra, where it was originally seen as rupya. Money was seen as rupya, and then it became rupiah. Then you have things like the NH1. We have been fed in school that NH1 was built by Sher Shah Suri, etc., etc. We have to go much further back. The Uttar Path and the Dakshin Path, which did exist in small little portions even before the Mauryans, were the strengthened, made stronger, and it is on the roots of the Uttar Path and the Dakshin Path that NH1 and a lot of our routes, our road routes, are also lie on that. So I could go on and on about it. In fact, I do write a lot about how the Mauryan state is the precursor to the modern Indian state. And we must realize that this multi-ethnic, multilingual, and multi-regional polity and society that we live in, the base was set by the Mauryans. This was many thousands of years ago. So a lot of things have happened after that. And, there have been layers upon layers upon layers of so many things. And unfortunately, in India, mainstream narrative and history seems to stop at the Mughals. Everything was done by the Mughals or Sher Shah Suri, or, just something after the turn of the millennium, after the Muslim invasion. So you will, even if you take something like Kalamkari, which has its roots in temple traditions. But if you read mainstream stuff about Kalamkari, you will read a lot about, the then Muslim overlords. So we have to go back to a greater extent to understand our own roots and to, kind of blow away all the dust which is there. As far as I am concerned, I started writing, I published this book. After publishing this book, I found that I had a lot of invitations to speak on these subjects. So then I started this other career of traveling across the world, especially in Europe and the United States and India. And then talking about ancient India, I do a lot of gendered analysis of women in ancient India, which is not news to most people over here because we've been together at a seminar, and anybody who has been reading my works, whether academic or popular, will know that this is one of the areas I focus on. Then I want to bring Sanskrit and Prakrit literature into the modern age, perhaps translate it or give rise to an interest in it. So I do a lot of that work. What I want to say is that this Urnabhi series brings together all the different kinds of work I do, whether it is my research in political science, or whether it is in ancient economics, or whether it is in ancient gendered studies of that period, the polity, the society, the religion, the architecture, the sculpture, everything comes together in this book, which is why I think that this book is perhaps an easier way for everyone to access some things which are the subject of very, very arcane academic research. So, Ankita, my journey is all about bringing ancient India to the modern age in an easy way. So that's what I think I'm doing. From my beginnings as a student, as a bureaucrat, and I not only resigned from the Indian bureaucracy, I worked for the United Nations for a few years over here. And believe me, that is even more lucrative than the Indian civil service. But then after 2018, I decided that that was not something which interested me, and I must spend all my time and all my energies in this. Ancient India is my karma bhumi. So that's where I must spend all my time. And I'm an unofficial ambassador from the court of Chandragupta Maurya to the modern age. Ankita?
Thank you so much, Sumedha ji. That was very nice, and also for that elaborate history about your journey as a writer, and especially what made you decide to write, especially on the Mauryan period. Thank you also for elaborating upon the Uttara Panth and the Dakshin Panth, because and you know the Mauryan state, as what you said, as the precursor to the modern Indian state. Well put. So now I would like to uh, tell us or enlighten us about your series. Actually, Gunabi, how was it published? And also, I would like to put across this one important question. What do you think is the importance of historical fictions like Gunabi that you have written in understanding dharma, in understanding Sanatan Dharma to be precise, and also from the point of view of uh, you know, like you said, clearing the dust about the Mughals, as if they did everything and all that. So, how are these historical fictions important from that perspective to understand our dharmic civilization, so that it can help us to uh, reanalyze our history, our itihas? Yes, over to you.
So that's a very good question, and a very serious one, because when I write, then I must keep in mind all the things that I want to do. Sometimes those things are not in keeping with the aims and objectives of popular fiction. So, how do I put the two together? If I want to write about our own past and history from the dharmic lens, if I also want it to be popular and easily accessible and for everyone to read it, how do I mix these two things? It's a tough ask. It's something I do all the time whenever I write. And it's a very good question, Ankita. Because what has happened is that in popular fiction, ancient India stands nowhere. Where is ancient India in popular fiction in India, in English, or even in other languages? Although I would say that so many other Indian languages are a little better at this than English, because there are historical novels which have been written about different aspects and different areas of the country at different times. But in English, this genre is missing. And that is actually a huge gap. Why? Because it is through fiction that somehow we take things in very easily at a young age, or even if not at a young age. Suppose we are not very serious about everything, we just want to read a book. But while reading that book, perhaps we are imbibing very serious things. For instance, look at me. Say 10, 15, 20 years ago, or when I was a teenager, if you had asked me to rattle off the list of all the kings and queens of England for the past 1500 years, 2000 years, I would have done it simply because I used to read those books. There was a very famous author of that time called Jean Plaidy. She wrote books on all the English kings and queens, and I read all of them. So I knew all of them. So it is very important for us to know that gap. The popular way of getting our important and significant historical events to people is through simple things, perhaps like books, films, although the film industry in India is so compromised that I really don't want to say films. And even books, one has to be very careful because there are lots of people writing lots of stuff. But as an author, the idea is to do what is the heading of this talk today: stories. Tell stories. Those stories automatically transmit all the things that you want to do. We are the land of stories. After all, what is Itihas and Puran? Itihas and Puran is nothing but stories. And when rishis like Valmiki and Ved Vyas put all those stories together in our Itihas, in our epics, what did they do? They told us things in simple ways, and they told us those things in a way which we imbibed while reading those Itihas Puran compositions. There is one very big difference here, though. I find that my writing is not construed by people as being very simple. My children often tease me that you have to ask people to take a test before they read your book because it's too complicated and too dense. I will have to wait for, readers to tell me after they read these books about whether it is too complicated or too dense. But somehow the kind of effort perhaps that our ancestors used to put in reading those stories, the stories from the Puran, stories from Itihas, I don't know if today's reader has that kind of patience. Even stories from the Ramayana and Mahabharata have to be kind of, dumbed down, made simple before people will start reading them in the millions. So that's a question for me. That's a question for any author who's writing. To what extent do they, perhaps I would like to use the word compromise, others may not want to use that word. To what extent would they like to compromise what they are trying to say to make it more popular? Perhaps one does, perhaps one does not. I find it very difficult to carry out this kind of compromise. However, happily and luckily for me, I have found readers for the books as I want to write them. And I have found people who love these books. The fact that Urnabi 1 was loved by so many people was a surprise to me, because I do get the feeling that sometimes I'm not, fully in sync with what is happening around me in terms of the popular narrative that is going on. But it was a very, very pleasant surprise. And the response to this book, this is the second book in the series, it has been astonishing. And also, given the fact that I was not really able to go to India or to, launch it formally, the response has been absolutely overwhelming. So perhaps to answer your question, Ankita, if people write these dharmic stories, then people will read these dharmic stories. So we need to write them. All of us here perhaps are content creators in some way or the other. So we must write these stories. Then only will everyone in this country get back to learning about our past. And learning about our past is not just for fun. It is fun. I love reading about the past, but it's also for learning. It's also for learning our own roots. It's also for giving our future a direction. That's why I like reading about the past or writing about the past, because I like to think of the future. I like to learn things from the past and then project it into the future. So I write, as I'm very fond of using this 360-degree um, way of putting things, this metaphor. So I have tried to read everything from philosophy to theology to sculpture to art to music to food to clothes. So I know a little bit about everything. And I want to put, and I have put those features of our own dharmic civilization completely in this book, so that anyone who reads this book should be able to imbibe it automatically. So that is an ongoing effort, Ankita.
Yes, well said, that we have to understand our past in order to prepare ourselves for the future.
For the future.
Yes, so those who forget history are anyways doomed to repeat it. The famous quote.
Yes.
Yes, thank you for enlightening us on that. Also, the importance of getting certain messages to people through media, like books and stories, as you just mentioned, since they automatically translate into what we intend to do and say. Uh, so, Chanakya's Arthashastra is at the center of the entire Unnati series. Can you elaborate us more on this?
So the Arthashastra has been, my lodestar. It has been something which first time I got exposed to it was in school. So I was in class 8, and it was mentioned in school as, being this treatise on economics. So somehow it just caught my attention, and I was fascinated by it, and I never could forget it. So I went on, with my education, and then I studied economics in a large part, perhaps because of Arthashastra. I studied Indian economics, but I did not find anything about the Arthashastra, nothing at all, in the Indian economics that I studied from Delhi University. So once I left college and started doing my own research and reading, then I started reading the Arthashastra, and you see, it is always there with me. This is one set of books which is always there with me on my table. This is like, I'm never there without it. And I refer to it for everything, not just for economics and politics, but even, for some part of the things that are found in the Dharma Shastras. Because Kautilya is also one of the lawgivers who is very often forgotten. And he has something to say on every aspect of life. Whether it be marriage or whether it be children or whether it be what you eat or wear. He has something to say on everything. He has a full chapter on laying down the law. He is also, therefore, one of the lawgivers of Hindu law. So the Arthashastra, the more I read it, the more I was fascinated by it, the more I kind of got completely sucked in. Now, the Arthashastra is connected very intimately with the Mauryans because Kautilya, Chanakya was the prime minister, the guru, the preceptor of Chandragupta Maurya. And we have stories which have come down to us in some Sanskrit works and Prakrit works in the Jain and Buddhist tradition about the relationship between Kautilya or Chanakya and Chandragupta Maurya. So from the Arthashastra, I moved on to Chandragupta Maurya and to the Mauryan Empire and to learning more and more about the Mauryan Empire. Now, the Arthashastra has 15 prakarans, and it has the first half is all about internal administration. The second half is all about how you relate to the external world. There are 7 elements of the state, and in describing these 7 elements of the state and in analyzing them, Kautilya and his Arthashastra are like an encyclopedia of ancient India. There is nothing which you will not find in the Arthashastra if you look for it. So that pushed me to also then start looking at corroboration for what was written in the Arthashastra. Now, say there is something in the Arthashastra about how the king should behave. So how do I know that that belonged to the Mauryan period, and how do I understand that and apply it in a Mauryan story? That was done by me through some kind of third-party corroboration. Here in this specific case, it will be from Ashokan inscriptions. So if you look at what is written in Ashokan inscriptions, and if you look at what is written in the Arthashastra, the parallels are unmistakable. So there may be a lot of people who tell you that no, Arthashastra and Kautilya had nothing to do with the Mauryans. They were much later, maybe the Guptas or maybe some other dynasty. That I do not think is correct as per the evidence that we have. The evidence that we have connects Arthashastra and Chanakya squarely to Chandragupta. So when I was writing this book and when I was researching it, which is still happening, research is ongoing, never ends. So every day I feel I learn something new about the Mauryans. I feel I learn a new aspect of the Mauryans. So the Arthashastra is a kind of manual. It is not a practical description that this is what happened during the Mauryan period or that is what happened. It's a manual. So therefore, you will not find the names of Chandragupta in it. You will not find the name of Ashok or Bindusar in it. Only at the end, it does say that this is Vishnugupta, the person who actually totally decimated the Nanda. So we know the story of the Nanda king who insulted Kautilya, and Kautilya said that he would decimate the Nandas to the very root. And he did that. He found this young boy, this young shepherd boy, and he understood his potential, took him with himself to Takshashila, where he was an acharya of political science and of earth. And that was where he compiled his manual. So now remember again that Arthashastra is not some standalone kind of composition. In the book, it's in the composition itself, it gives its own antecedents. The antecedents are found as far back as in the Shanti Parva of the Mahabharata. And there are the names of so many, at least 12 to 16 other gurus who had their own traditions of Arth and Arthashastra. And in all the discussions, you'll find Kautilya saying, this one says this one says this. I don't agree with them, I say this. So it's not standalone. Again, it is said that the Arthashastra was lost and it was found only in 1909 and published in Sanskrit in 1909 and in English in 1915 by Pandit Ganpati Shastri. Lost, but lost for whom? Maybe for people who did not read Sanskrit or did not understand Sanskrit, because those manuscripts were there. And ever since the time of the Mauryans, commentaries were being written on the Arthashastra. Commentaries such as those of the 10th, 12th century by Somdev Suri. Then you even have the Thirukural, which is around the 4th, 5th century in Tamil Nadu. Then you have Kamandaki. By the way, many people say that Kamandaki was a woman around the Gupta period. So Kamandaki also wrote a commentary on the Arthashastra. So please don't buy that story completely about it being lost. As far as application of its principles is concerned, I agree. There is no application of those principles. We don't read the Arthashastra. Pakistan and China may be reading it and learning many new ways in which to attack us, but we don't read it. So non-application of the policies which are written in the Arthashastra, very much so. But I do not believe that the book was ever really lost. It's just that, it has fallen out of favor. It has fallen out of normal narrative, and it's still not there. I do a lot of discussions within the strategic community, and I also conduct talks, and maybe I will conduct a few workshops for them about how to apply Kautilya's frameworks. But there are no takers. Maybe there will be now, but right now there are no takers. So the Arthashastra is a book which I feel is talked about a lot, not read enough, not applied enough, and not understood enough. It needs to be understood a lot, and especially in the modern age. I feel Kautilya's understanding of the economy and of polity are squarely pertinent and relevant to the modern age. I have conducted a few talks on this aspect of the Arthashastra, and I can link you to those talks or link you to some of my articles. The Arthashastra is a book which needs much more reading and application.
Thank you, Sumedha. I remember when you were in Guwahati, you were just running after here and there searching for books on the Hindu history of Assam and the Northeast. And then we were discussing about this for a long time the next day. Why is there so much a dearth of books on the history, the Hindu history of the Northeast?
Yes.
I don't know. I just remembered this.
Yes.
So, but you found out some books on that. So,
and actually, Ankita, on this topic, I would like to actually say something about the story.
Yes,
on the topic of Assam, actually. I'm sure you would love to hear something about the topic of Assam.
Definitely. Yes.
So, when I was writing this book, the Mauryans are often identified as a North Indian dynasty. Now, this I do not agree with or understand at all, because they were not a North Indian dynasty. They may have originated over there, but their empire, their work was done everywhere. So when I talk about ancient Assam, the Mauryans were there in ancient Assam also. When you talk about ancient Tamil Nadu, they were there also. Now, the Cholas, Cheras, and Pandyas were not part of the Mauryan Empire, but they were very close allies. And there was a very great kind of intermixture of the two administrations, and the Mauryans, being the big brother, used to help out these small kingdoms a lot. The point I want to make here, Ankita, is that anyone who thinks that the north, south, east, west were actually only the north was represented or the west was represented in the Mauryan Empire, that is not true. The position of Assam at the time of the Mauryans was very much there, was very much strong. There was an ancient kingdom. The position of Bengal, there was an ancient kingdom of Chandraketu Gad over there. There was also in the south, they were there till the Vaigai River, but below that, of course, were the Cholas, Cheras, and Pandyas. So when I write this and when I speak at different forums, some people are often very quick to say, but this is nothing to do with South India, or this is nothing to do with East India. I want to make the point that it does. So the kingdom of the Mauryans was from Afghanistan to the Vaigai River, from Bengal, which is now Bangladesh, to what is Balochistan. So it was actually much bigger than the India of today. And there are 6-7 countries now cut out from there. The point is related to what Ankita was just saying, and the discussions we had about finding books about it, is that this is kind of ignored. No one wants to research it. No one wants to write about it. But if you read the Arthashastra itself, there are people, items, materials, trade, regions mentioned which belong to all of Bharat. So this is something which I really want to push, and I want to emphasize, and I want to get people to realize this, to push it up in the consciousness of the modern Indian, that the Mauryans were not some North Indian dynasty. So that was in somebody had run spaces for this book on Twitter, and there were a couple of people from Kerala and Tamil Nadu, and they absolutely refuse to feel that there is anything interesting for them in this because it's some North Indian dynasty. Then when I was in Eindhoven talking about this book and some other things also, then another boy from Bangalore got up and said that no, this is of no, very little interest to us. I want to dispel this dust, the dust of centuries, which has been there on the unity of Bharat because of so many other experiences that we've had in the last millennium. I must blow away this dust through using research. So I'm sorry to have interrupted you, Ankita, but I really wanted to make this point.
No, no, that's a very relevant point, and also for countering the argument that the northeastern part of India was never Hindu.
Yes.
So, and this was exactly, I think, what we were discussing in the conference also,
Yes.
because it has a Hindu history. It was always Hindu. It has a
Which is
Hindu
ignored,
past.
which is
Yes.
unfortunately ignored.
Yes, yes. And also, most importantly, in order to, there are several places actually, there is a place called Dauki in Meghalaya, and there are several such Ganesh images, Ganesh murtis, three murtis of Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, which leads us to the Hindu connection of these places. So I have been there personally and I have seen these places. So it is completely wrong to assume such a thing, and most importantly, also when we say that today places like in Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Bali, they have a beautiful tradition of the Ramayana. Yes, but then we do not understand the fact that it is Northeast India through which this Ramayana tradition went from there. Northeast India is the missing link. So I thought it relevant since we were speaking on this to say this. Anyways, so thank you for explaining about the importance of the Arthashastra and why we need to read it in order to understand various minute facets of our ancient polity, society, and economy. I would also like to, while you narrate the story of the Urnabi series, I would also like to ask you to enlighten us about, how have you positioned the role of women in the society and polity of ancient India? Or let me put it this way, how do you, as a researcher, envision the role played by women in the socio-political setup of ancient India? Because this is the main essence, the main theme of your book. So, yes, please carry on.
So this book started with the protagonist, who's called Mr. Casey, for various reasons. One, of course, is that Mr. Casey is mentioned in the Natya Shastra, as many people here who are scholars will know anyway. And the ones who are also dancers will know very well that she was one of the original dancers who was created by Brahma to show the art of Nritya to the entire world. So Mr. Casey was the protagonist. He also had to be a spy, because Acharya Chanakya ran the most efficient spy system in history. To run this huge empire, there had to be a very efficient and big spy system. So I've taken the name of the spy system by using the concept of the Urnanabhi in Sanskrit, which has been, the Tatsam is, not the Tatsam, the Tadbhav is Urnabhi, which is just a kind of broken English word which means nothing but sounds okay, but it has some Sanskrit antecedents, which just means the spider's web. This spider's web operated to help the empire to run, to extend itself, and to function smoothly. In the first book, Mr. Casey comes to Patliputra and wants to kill Acharya Chanakya because she thinks that he was the one who had her older sister killed. She meets him, but she's co-opted into the spy system. She meets her boss, who is the male protagonist, the hero, if you will, who is called Pushyamitra. And this book is about the extension of the Mauryan Empire into what we today know as India and a bit of Pakistan. So it is the establishment of Mauryan suzerainty up till the northern part, up till what is now Pakistan, and to Bangladesh, to Saurashtra, and to the south. That is book one. What happens? Who are the other historical players? How does Patliputra function in this? These are all the parts of the story which are taken from history. So remember, this is historical fiction. Most of it is history, but there's a little bit of fiction just to hang the story onto it. So you'll find real characters like Chandragupta, Chanakya, etc. for people who are interested in, Arvind ji was there when I was speaking in another session. And I think I remember I told him that in response to a question, that this book I think of as the sequel to the Sanskrit play Mudra Rakshas. So a lot of the characters have their literary antecedents in the Mudra Rakshas. This was conceived of as one book, but after writing it, I felt that I was not satisfied, and the story must go on, because also the Mauryan Empire did not stop at what is now known as Pakistan. It went on into Afghanistan. It clashed with the biggest Central Asian power of the day, which was one of the biggest world powers of the day, the Seleucids. So Seleucus was one of the generals of Alexander, the Greek invader who had come in from the northwest. So after Alexander's death, and he died while going back from India, by the way. After his death, his generals, who were called the Diadochi, all of them fought with each other, and Seleucus kind of emerged triumphant. During the time that Chandragupta and Seleucus were clashing, there were some pockets of resistance from other Diadochi of Alexander. How that resistance plays into the hands of Chandragupta and Chanakya when they are trying to clash with Seleucus. Because remember, they were both big powers. And Chandragupta did not want to spend all his resources in fighting. He wanted to concentrate first on the well-being of his own empire and then use his resources for fighting. So that is what, is one of the unique selling points of Kautilya's strategy, to win without a war. So that is what is called Tushnim Yudh. Tushnim Yudh, which is fighting by other means, using spies, covert fighting. And I have tried to use a lot of the principles of the Arthashastra in this book too. This is the story of how Mr. Casey adapts to her life as a married woman, as somebody who's going to bear a child, as somebody who is part of the new Mauryan Empire. And it is also the story of the extension of the Mauryan Empire into Afghanistan and its clash with the Seleucids. So while writing this story, the other thing which I kept in mind is what Ankita just asked me. What was the position of women at the time? So this protagonist is a Ganika. A Ganika was a courtesan deluxe, courtesan extraordinaire, not to be confused with a common prostitute, but somebody who was well versed in the 64 arts, in all the Chaturdash Vidyasthanam, somebody who was a very important and prestigious member of society as far as politics, society, economy, everything went. They also took part in the politics of the day. They were sometimes, tools for the kings and kingdoms of the day. And Mr. Casey is also one such. I have also shown her position in society, within her family. How did she deal with being a family, being a part of a family? How did she deal with being part of the administration? Doing all this, through all this, I have tried to put in popular form all that I have researched about women in the past 10-15 years. What was their status? What was their position? What was their economic position? What was their ritual position? How was their education? How were they treated inside the family? I am also writing a book called The Modern Women of Ancient India, which will deal with 12 role models of ancient India, and through it, look at the position of women in the past. So all that I have read and understood about the position of women in the past, filtered through and is captured in this book and in this series, as it will be done in the non-fiction book that I am writing, The Modern Women of Ancient India. So it is in the fiction book that I have written. After reading it, you will get an idea of what exactly was the position of women in ancient India. Now, if this is not a very easy question to answer, Ankita, I mean, we would have to have another session on the position of women in ancient India. Suffice it to say that it is not what people think, and to call ancient Hindu society as regressive or backward, or a society which pushed women to the back, exploited, humiliated, or kept them subservient is not correct. They had a very, very functional role and a good status in society. They were as much part of society as other men were. So when you read this book, you will understand a lot of the, again, as I say, academic and arcane issues, which perhaps you have to read the Dharma Sutras to understand. I'm hoping that when you read this book, all those things will be imbibed automatically. And I, this heroine is a woman. I am a woman. This book has been written with with women in mind, written by a woman, keeping women in mind. So on reading this book, after reading this book, actually, we could have a discussion on the position of women in ancient India in its various aspects, and that would be a very interesting thing to do, Ankita.
For that, I would like you to enlighten us more about your research, and especially since you are settled abroad in Geneva. So, as a writer and researcher, how do you access the primary sources? And also, how do you envision the importance of primary sources in understanding our true Itihasa? What is your inspiration behind the main protagonists of the story? And also, why did you choose to write a fiction series on a very, very important subject from Bharatiya Itihas? Why a fiction? Yes.
And why not non-fiction? Well, yes, that's a good question.
Yeah, over to you.
So my focus, my USP, my whole thing about being a researcher is primary sources. Especially for Indian history, do not trust secondary sources at all. Whenever you can, however much you can, please read the original inscription. So what are our sources of evidence in history? So you have texts in many different languages. You will have to learn Sanskrit. And if, like if I want to write on the Cholas, then I will have to learn Tamil. So primary sources, that is texts. Then you have inscriptions, that is epigraphy. Then you have archaeological remains. Then you have numismatics, which is coins. And then you also have oral history, which is folk history. So these are the kind of primary sources that you have. There has been a lot of distortion of history in India, and all of us are very well aware of it. This distortion has been going on for at least 200-300 years. It's not just the Nehruvian time that did it. Colonial history is a distortion. Eurocentric history is a distortion. So for the past 300-400 years, we've been going through a period of distortion of history where people have written whatever they liked. And why have we not been able to challenge them? Now, if I don't know Sanskrit and somebody says that in this Sanskrit book is written so and so, what can I say? Nothing. So you have all these people, I really like to call them these dead white men, who wrote this series, who translated this whole series called the Sacred Books of the East. So people like Rhys David or Max Mueller, etc., etc. They were the ones who first translated these, and it is through their translations that it has come to us. And these secondary sources are to be 100% rejected. We must go back to the original. So learn Sanskrit, read the original. And that is what I have done in this series. So if any one of you wants to ask me, why have you written this? I will probably be able to give you the exact source and reason as to why I have written that. All of it is based on primary evidence. That's the historical part. And, fiction is, of course, fiction. I cannot overemphasize the importance of primary sources. They will clear what all of us feel very resentful and angry about, distortion of our past. So the focus on primary sources, focus on reading it ourselves will clear away this distortion. Now, as to the question of why not write non-fiction, why write fiction, I wouldn't mind writing either. Of course, I love weaving stories in my mind, so perhaps that's why I landed on this fiction. But otherwise, writing non-fiction is still an option. In fact, now that you asked me, Ankita, I am going to tell you, I think for the first time in any forum, that I am planning a book of non-fiction on the Mauryans. And it will have, I'm going to write a small, simple book. So if you read that, you will have a basic idea of what the Mauryan period was like from a 360-degree comprehensive point of view. So I am planning non-fiction. I started with fiction because I love stories and I love making up stories, but I'm definitely also planning non-fiction. This is what I am planning next. Have I answered all your questions? You had quite a bunch of them. I think I hope I've answered all of them, Ankita.
Yes, all of them.
Okay.
All of them, very true. And whatever you said about the primary sources just now, I can very well understand the difficulties involved in accessing these primary
Oh, yes, you had asked me
as a
about
researcher.
accessing it. Okay, so the good thing about Sanskrit texts is that a lot of them have been digitized. So I could access those digitized Sanskrit texts. Then, you have ASI reports. Then I have also tried to go to those places where the archaeological remains are there. And I have bought a lot of books, a lot of manuscripts. Many of my friends over the past 15 years have brought suitcases full of these things to Geneva. So it's not easy. It's very difficult. And when I go to India, I have to take some time out just to go to libraries and to go to, the ASI or a place like that to be able to get primary sources. It's not easy, but I try my best.
Okay, so Manisha has asked, which version of the Arthashastra would Sumedha ji recommend that we buy?
R.P. Kangle.
Okay.
So there are 3 volumes in this. That you remember primary sources. So this is the Sanskrit one. And if you are not that well versed, then this is the English translation. And if you just want to know, bits about each topic, then this is volume 3. This is the one I would recommend. And there is a Penguin edition of Arthashastra, which is good as a kind of compendium of information. Just the facts. It's not a translation, just some facts have been taken out. It's a good compendium. I would recommend these 2. Please don't read Patrick Olivelle and Mark McLeish.
Okay. We have Shikha. While talking about writing the dharmic narrative of Itihas, do you feel the language as a medium of communication plays an important role?
This is such a good question, and it goes to the core of my problem. I don't want to write in English, but I don't have any option because I don't know either Hindi or Sanskrit well enough. You see, I am a product of our, colonial education policy. So I think in Hindi and partly in Sanskrit, and I write in English. So, it kind of really twists things around. I am not able to express exactly what I want to write, and this is a really big problem. However, we have to work with whatever we have. So my attempt is to make English into an Indic language. So if you read the book, you will see a lot of Sanskrit words in the text itself. And this was a question of huge conflict with my editor when I sent her the manuscript for Udnabi 1. We had 13 rounds of editing because we just could not agree. She did not want any Sanskrit words, and I was not willing to remove them. So we had to compromise a bit, but there were things I drew a line and I did not compromise beyond that. And thanks to my publisher, she agreed with a lot of that. So my attempt is to make English an Indic language and use as many Sanskrit, Hindi words. If you're writing, if you are Telugu or Tamil, then you put in those words. Just put in words from your own language as much as you can. English right now is not an Indic language. But if we are stuck with it, let us try to make it an Indic language. There are some untranslatables. Do read Rajiv Malhotra's books on Sanskrit and untranslatables, as well as Subhash Kak. They've all written on things which cannot be translated. There are some words which also have big concepts behind them. For instance, say Tribhang. Now, Siriji will know that Tribhang is a very complicated thing. It's a very complicated word. So my publisher insisted that I remove that word because I had just said that my heroine was standing in Tribhang. Now she did not like that word. She wanted me to remove it. So there was a lot of back and forth. I finally agreed. And, it took me one whole paragraph and it took me 2 weeks to think about how to write, how to describe Tribhang. Because it is not just the posture, it is so much more. But these problems are part and parcel of writing about the Indian past in English. So language is definitely an issue. It's a big issue. We have to keep fighting with it all the time. And I sometimes feel that I don't succeed, because when I read what I've written, I feel that there's a gap. Perhaps what is in my head has not been translated fully into this, because those crossed wires are inside my head. So I had gone to a lit fest where this the whole panel was on this question, that if you write historical fiction, is English a problem? So I was the only one who said yes, and all the other Indian authors were very happy about it. And no, English is perfect. And I could not understand how. I cannot even write uttariye antariye kaya band in English. How do I write it? But a lady who writes about the 60s and maybe 40s, she said, no, you can write skirt. I cannot write skirt for Antariye. It is not the same thing. Language is a big issue. It will continue to be a big issue. I don't see any solution for this till we start writing and reading in Hindi and Sanskrit.
Yes, true. There is another question from Shikha, Sumedha ji. While discussing about the Mauryan Empire, what definition of empire does the writer make use of, and what is the writer's opinion on Ashoka's Kalinga War?
So what definition of empire? Well, I would say, I don't understand the question very well, but I would say, the geographical area where there was political control. I think that is what I would call it, an empire. Now, as far as Kalinga is concerned, it is not my opinion that Kalinga stood apart and was not a part of Chandragupta's empire. Because if you go back to the time when Chandragupta came, he acquired the empire from the Nandas. Read Kharavela's inscription together with the description of the geographical area as it passed over to the Mauryans, and you will see that Kalinga was already a part of the empire of Chandragupta. If the person who's at Shikha, if you want to know more about it, I will send you a detailed article which I have written on this exact question. So I can't go into so much detail, but I will send you that article, and you will see that based on Kharavela's inscription, the idea that Kalinga stood apart from the Mauryan Empire is not tenable. When Ashok was sent there, it was probably to suppress some kind of rebellion. The whole idea of Kalinga and Ashok has been exaggerated beyond description. If you go back again to primary sources, this kind of distortion is not there. So my idea of the empire, again, if you buy the book and you open it, you will see the extent of the empire, and it is as I described, from Afghanistan to the south. In the south, Chola, Cheras and Pandyas were separate, and from Bangladesh to Balochistan.
Thank you, ma'am, for this wonderful talk. I was just curious to know about the bloodshed history of Kalinga, what Ashoka described in his own inscription from Jogad and Kalsi. What is
He has not described any of the kind of bloodshed that you're thinking of. He mentions it certainly that he was disturbed by the kind of thing which happened in Kalinga. But like I said, read the original Brahmi, and the amount of exaggeration about the bloodshed comes down significantly. Now, if you read the 17th century book of Taranath, and then you see the amount of bloodshed, then it suddenly goes up. But somebody writing in the 17th century and Ashoka's own inscriptions, you have to see balance, which one is better evidence. So the idea of Ashok becoming this Buddhist and then, rejecting everything else is also not true, because the Mauryan emperors, all three of them, were great patrons of Sanatan Dharma, of Buddhism, of Ajiviks, of Jains. Chandragupta Maurya became a Jain and Ashok became Buddhist. And Ashok as well as Bindusar have patronized big caves of the Ajiviks, which are still found in Bihar. And you will be able to read the inscriptions on the sides of the walls. So this idea that there was some kind of conflict, and that Ashok one day got up and said, no, I am so sad, I killed so many people, now I am Buddhist and I hate everyone else, is not true. He did spend a lot of effort and resources in spreading the words of the Buddha and, sending off his children as monks, etc. Did not mean that this was an opposition to anything else. This is what you must understand. There was no opposition. The whole civilizational imperative of Sanatan Dharma was going on. Works were being composed. Science, technology, engineering, mathematics, religion, theology was going on in the Sanatan Dharma civilizational context, in the Buddhist context, in the Jain context, in the Ajivik context. Because you see, all these are not opposed to each other. They come from the same root. Therefore, they grow from the same root, maybe in slightly different directions. But these are all dharmic, Indic, civilizational imperatives.
Ma'am, what is your opinion on then this idea, what Sanjeev Sanyal sir has talked about worshipping the false heroes? Like he is talking about that there is a whole propaganda for creating or using this whole narrative of Ashoka for making him as national.
I will refer you to Swarajya magazine, where both Sanjeev ji and I have written on this topic. If you subscribe to Swarajya magazine, you read some articles of his on this topic and you read some articles of mine. And you will see that we are both more or less in agreement.
There is one question by Komal. Namaste, Komal ji. While I wholeheartedly agree with Ma'am Ojha that we should learn languages like Sanskrit and other Indian languages to access primary sources, I also see how the youth, not researchers, around us are impatient and inconsistent. They will resort to reading, if at all, stuff in English and maybe Hindi. Do you think we should also supplement our efforts by undertaking massive translation projects, writing of fiction as well as non-fiction?
Absolutely. I completely agree. I completely agree that for everyone, it's not everyone's cup of tea. So we must, wherever we can, give authentic translations, and people will have to access translation. Now look at me. I have to access Tamil translations. I am reading Sangam literature, but I cannot read Akkananuru and Purunanuru in Tamil because I don't know it. So I will have to access translations, but those must be authentic translations. So that is the thrust. People will read in their own languages. So there must be translation across all Indian languages, from Hindi to Malayalam to Tamil to Telugu to Sanskrit to everything. We must make that very, very vibrant again. It was at one point of time. Today it is not. And I agree that to make it accessible to everyone in their own preferred language, whatever it must make, whatever it is, whichever preferred language, there must be translation. Just be careful of the authenticity of the translation. When you read one, then please look at the authenticity of that translation also. Otherwise, I am in full agreement with.
When it comes to books of non-fiction and literary criticism on women in ancient India, we do not have many authoritative books. I can only think of Altikar and Chandrakala Padya. Will eagerly wait for your next book on the modern women of ancient India. However, we also need more historical fictions on women of ancient India by women from a dharmic point of view. Are there more women writing historical fiction about women that you would recommend, or do you think there are lots of gaps that need to be filled in both these arenas?
There are lots of gaps. Lots of gaps. Who's writing which women are writing historical fiction about women? I don't think I know anyone. I know some who are writing about some of the kings. I don't think I know anyone who's writing about women. No. So yes, there are gaps. Everyone who can write, please start writing books.
Siri Ramaji, yes.
Namaste. And,
Namaste. Very nice to see you.
And I started reading the second book. I haven't read the first one, but I did start reading the second book. And like Janani ji, I would like to say that it's very, very visual. So I can, I love fiction. Just like you do, I've read fiction right across the spectrum. And so congratulations, it makes for very easy reading, but with a lot of intelligence and the women characters, like you don't see that often in historical Indian fiction. What little is there in English, most of it is focused on male characters.
Or we have some women like Rani Lakshmi Bai, for example, is very much written about. Poems have been written about her, but not others. So Siriji, this other book of mine, The Modern Women of Ancient India, I'm hoping to remedy that.
Great. So, Mike, slightly, maybe not difficult for you, definitely, but one thing that tends to happen, whether it's when I take my subject like dance, you say, and whatever, when you talk about the Natya Shastra or those, the tendency is to everything in the past was glorious and everything in the present has to learn from the past because that was so perfect that now not you can't get much right unless you refer to that. So, but of course, when I read about the past, whether it's Natya Shastra or Abhinay Darpana or whatever, there are questions that come to a modern woman like you. So, what is are there some examples from your novel which you think that, okay, there Chanakya, did he think, is it suited to our times, or did you want, are
One
you
of the
thinking
things,
about those are the things that, you also incorporate in your book, like, things that you see from this historical distance as a modern
so if
thinker?
you see, I am a great admirer of Acharya Chanakya or
Hmm.
Kautilya, but if I see one problem in all his dealings about everything, and especially women, was that, he really used them as spies. He really used them, and used in the most utilitarian sense. So sometimes, one has to stop and think, okay, there is a larger issue that you have to keep the empire running, etc., etc. But that very, very cold eyed kind of utilitarian attitude, that women will be used for what? For their tenderness, for their ability to forge friendships, for their ability to enter anywhere. And when you read the Arthashastra and you see his very cynical and focused point of view, sometimes you do feel a bit put off. That women are not just instruments. Now, to be fair, he also uses men as instruments.
Yeah,
That
yes.
is the Kautilyan way of looking
Of
at things.
thinking, yeah, he's
Yes.
very
And
practical.
I don't know, you've not read, or maybe you haven't. I have a little dialogue between Siddhartha and Mr. Casey on this, about how they try to use the gullibilities, weaknesses of everyone to exploit them and to spread their own points of view to everyone, or to make them fall in line. So there is a little bit of a dialogue between Mr. Casey and Siddhartha. She criticizes him for this. He says that he's not doing it for himself, he's doing it for the empire. So naturally, there are certainly issues of dissonance. But so it is any time of
Yeah,
history you take, whether you take the
sure,
present or
yeah,
the past. Also, what you said about everything in the past being glorious is a bit of an absolutist view. I don't think that anyone who has any kind of, perspective will agree with that. There are certain things in the past which were good. There were certain things which were bad. The whole idea is to see if there was something good and we can actually use it. And
yes,
whatever was bad, we don't need to bring it back again to modern times. And in the past being glorious is, it's a very unnuanced and very childish kind of view, I would say, Siriji. Nothing is totally glorious. There's only propaganda which is totally glorious. So we have to look at it, what's and all, and just pick up. According to me, now there are some traditionalists who don't agree with this. But in
correct.
my own humble opinion, we need to learn only those things which will help us and which we think are good for the future. The rest, we don't need, we don't want.
So it's fantastic that you bring that perspective in that book also, because the chapters, as I read it, it's not merely the woman actually becomes like a critique of that.
Yes,
When I was reading her, the
yes,
way you have presented her thoughts is not just like I'm a woman in this situation, but also she's thinking critically of what the
yes.
men and what the
All
situation.
the time, all the
So
time.
I found that part of that fictional thing very engaging. And I also thought that something you as an author have brought out so beautifully, because you don't see those, the thoughts and critical thoughts, not just this is fantastic, that is fantastic. It was not very, so I love that part of it. So it's very
Thank you,
engaging, and
Siriji.
congratulations.
And if you read book 1, you'll find even more of that criticism, because when she enters this whole universe, then she is completely at odds with it. She doesn't like it. And in fact, there is a huge fight between Pushyamitra and her on a matter of principle, which she says that she will not give into it because she thinks it's wrong and she thinks it's exploitative. She will not give into this. Whereas he says it's to be done for the empire. What do you mean, no?
Okay. I'll go ahead and read that.
So thank you for that very interesting perspective. And it's very insightful of you, because many people miss that. So thank you for this insight.
Yeah, thanks.
A lot of things are written about the destruction of temples and establishment of Buddhist idols, like in the case of Angkor Wat. Did it happen after the
In the
Kalinga
case
War?
in the case of what?
In the case of Angkor Wat.
Angkor Wat. Okay, but Angkor Wat is not in India.
Like in the case of Angkor Wat, did it happen after the Kalinga War? Were these things inspired by Ashoka's acceptance of Buddhism?
I'm sure you can make out from my expression that I don't agree at all. I'm sorry, this is all brainwashing. This whole idea of the fight between Buddhists and Hindus is one which does not really take off from the ground if you read primary sources.
True.
A lot of the things that are, Pushyamitra, for example. Now, my Pushyamitra Sung is an ancestor of that Pushyamitra Sung, who is reputed to have killed God knows how many Buddhists and cut off their heads and destroyed Buddhist temples and what have you. So Pushyamitra Sung was not a person who destroyed Buddhist places of worship or killed them. All this is taken from 3 places. One is that same History of Buddhism by Taranath, who wrote it in the 17th century. And he was a very, very kind of rabid Buddhist. And he made up a lot of stories. So to look at that as evidence of anything that happened 2000 years ago is stupid. The other places are the Ashok Vadan and the Divya Vadan, where some kind of things like this are described. They are closer to the period of the Mauryans. However, in those books, Pushyamitra is not mentioned anywhere. So, a lot of these things have been made up because it suits the politics of a lot of people to keep Buddhists and Hindus at odds. And it suited the politics of the colonials and the Christians who came in to say that Buddhism was a reform of that horrible old Hinduism. So, all the bad things about Hinduism were reformed by that wonderful Martin Luther-like character called Gautam Buddha. Arrant nonsense. So, all this is, again, go back to primary sources and look for them. If you look for, for example, if you take Sarnath. Sarnath has a Mauryan level, it has a Gupta level, it has post-Gupta levels also. Why is that so? Now, who broke it and who made it? Or was it that it was in the nature of growth along the centuries that went on? Because you can see all of them being built on top of each other. There are a lot of mixed monuments in India. But this story of Hindus killing Buddhists, breaking Jain and Buddhist places of worship is not borne out by evidence.
Now, I just want to add, we should remember that Buddha is considered as an avatar of Vishnu. So,
Yes.
So that's a big thing,
So, so Buddhists and Hindus are not different. They have been made different in the 20th century.
Yeah, that's a good point, Sumedha ji. But I just have an observation. Yes, please.
Just one more question. How difficult was it to balance this history and fiction? How difficult?
That's a good question. That's about the art of writing. But I tell you what, Janani ji, I do everything in an inspired way. So when I write. I don't think about anything else. I don't cut out or delete anything. I wish I had it here. I will show you my manuscript. I just keep on writing. So I cannot really tell you what happens in my head. I just read a lot of research, a lot of stuff, and then I start writing. And everything comes into place, clicks into place here. So writing for me is not difficult. It's very easy. When I am in that phase of inspiration, then I write continuously. So it took me 4 months to write this book. And I wrote for 4 months for about say 8 to 10 hours a day. And it just flows out. So if you ask me how all that balancing was done, I can't tell you because it all happened inside my head. And then it came out through my pen.
So you're not doing it consciously that I have to balance it. Yeah, that's the good thing. Yeah.
Ankita, you were asking me something?
So no, but since we were talking about Buddhism, so what do you think can be cited or can be understood as the most important reason for the decline of Buddhism from the Bharatiya subcontinent and not Sanatan Dharma? Do you think was it because of Buddhism's adherence to the concept of complete non-violence or completely shunning violence?
This is a very, very kind of tough question because, there's some things which happen in the flow, in the organic flow of history. But I would say if I really had to, take out a few factors, one or two were that, it was finally the two were very similar. Sanatan Dharma and Buddhism, and what was there to differentiate it? How would they be really kept separate from the rest of the Hindu civilization or the rest of the Hindu people? Very difficult. Then they also say that the Buddhist monasteries became too rich and they became so rich and corrupt that people were put off by them. Then, of course, they also say that when the Turkish invasion happened, it actually smashed the Buddhist monasteries. We all know about Nalanda and Vikramshila and how the libraries burned for months. So perhaps that was a physical wiping out.
Yeah, because
by the Turkish
they also
invasion.
maybe somewhere also down they did not fight back, because of that non-violent, the Gandhian non-violent.
Or maybe they had become too complacent. And they had actually become really, really rich. The monasteries were really, really rich and complacent. And also, again, I would say, why do we say that Buddhism died in the land of its birth? It didn't. Because it still lives on in so many things in Sanatan Dharma. I feel the two are, very similar. And you cannot say that it was dead. It just kind of got merged. So, but if you want to really look at one thing which wiped them out physically, it would be the Turkish invasions, of course.
So while what we call Hinduism today, it survived. Despite the
So because I think that Buddhism it is just a child of Sanatan Dharma. So it went back to its mother. And Sanatan Dharma is a big tree. So you have everything inside under that tree, so many branches, different ones, so it just went back to its mother. I don't feel that it died out. I don't think it died out because there are so many things which are, they are not different. They are the same. And we have had so many different sampradayas within Hinduism. So this was also a sampradaya. I tell you all this, creating Buddhism as a separate religion, XYZ, this is all a conspiracy. This is a colonial conspiracy.
I liked your perspective which you spoke on Buddhism. But let us also remember that there were strong debates between Buddhism and Hinduism. Sekiyar in Periya Puranam, he speaks about the strong debates which Hinduism.
There is a long tradition of that. I agree with you. And that is in the tradition of Shastrat. And there was a big discussion between the Buddhist worldview and the Sanatan Dharma worldview because there were some differences in it. Even though the roots were same, there were some differences. Of course, they are very, and they are recorded in so many of our manuscripts and compositions.
Yeah. And ma'am, you spoke in terms of not so glorious aspects. I do not want to use the term inglorious aspects, but not so very glorious aspects of the past. Can you name a few, ma'am?
For example, we were talking in the context of Chanakya. So I do not like or perhaps, I have reservations about the way in which women were used, young women, old women, widows, and, helpless women were also used and made into spies.
Yeah.
So that is not something which one can really approve of. Although one tiny corner of my mind admires 100% cynicism of Kautilya. For him, nothing is important except national interest.
Yeah.
So but you look at what he says, that the son of any king, all princes, must be kept under observation. They should, or perhaps also be kept, under imprisonment. And if they are too much trouble, then they should just be killed off.
Okay. Ma'am, I have this question with me. It has been there in my mind. We usually speak in terms of women in Sanskrit literature, in Sanskrit, who were great scholars in Vedas and other things. And on the other hand, you have communist critics like Kumkum Sangari and others who say that not too many women, only very few people were there. Where is the truth, ma'am? Where is the truth? Were all women Vedic scholars?
So, Sharda ji, the truth of something that happened thousands of years ago, even I am not genius enough to tell you that. I can only tell you my, what I have gathered from evidence. Of course, everyone was not a Vedic scholar. But I think that there were a significant number of Vedic scholars. Okay. Also, I think that apart from formal learning, the Chaturdash Vidyasthanam and the Vedic, Vedang, all those studies, there was also, practical learning. And that practical learning went on in families from mother to daughter to daughter. And I'll give you an instance of that. For example, medical learning. Okay. Medical learning was very much passed on from mother to daughter because they had to take care of the whole family.
Okay.
So,
the informal medical knowledge.
Learning was, and also formal learning was important, considered important for both women and men. But I think later, when the number of years you had to spend on Vedang went from 12 to 16 to 32, I think then it became a little more difficult. This is one of Altekar's ideas, of course, that when it became very, very extended, then women started doing less of Vedic studies. But Vedic studies is one thing. Common learning, practical learning is another thing. Practical learning was there with everyone. Okay. Formal learning was of course there with elite women, but it also percolated down to other women who really wanted it. Not just Brahmin women, but women from other sections of society also. Now, again, I keep telling you, I read the Arthashastra. So when you read the Arthashastra and you read about Shudras, and you say that what he says is that Shudras are the ones who do Karu, Kushilav, Karm, and you know what that will mean. That means all the things that were done, science, technology, art, artisan, etc., all those were the Shudras. So there was a lot of learning in amongst the Shudra community, which we now call as technical knowledge.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Because my next question was about to be that. Was learning confined only to the Brahminical community or was it open? Because you see a lot of colonial discourse, going
Absolute rubbish. Okay. Absolute rubbish. Okay. And so many of these questions, please do watch my web series on ancient India, which is called Mauryalok. Okay. If you watch episode 8, okay, it will give you an answer to this question.
Sure, ma'am.
If you watch episode 6, it will give you an answer to the question on women.
Kindly give us links, ma'am. We would love to see.
Yes.